This may be one of the most important podcast episodes I ever do, and let me tell you why. But at first, I'm going to give you a warning because this episode deals with the causes of suicide and what we can do as everyday people to help people who are struggling. You very likely know someone who has thought about suicide. If you don't know somebody, one of your friends or family do. So please listen and share this episode. And before I introduce our guest, here's some sobering statistics. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2022, almost 50,000 Americans died by suicide. In 2022, there were an estimated 1.6 million suicide attempts. In 2021, 12.3 million American adults seriously considered it. In 2021, suicide was among the ninth leading causes of death for people ages 10 to 64, and the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14 and 20 to 34. 10% of youth in grades 9 through 12 reported they had made at least one suicide attempt in the past 12 months, and females attempted almost twice as often as males. So with that context, I want to introduce someone who's an expert, not by her choice, but by experience, Jenny Thrasher. She's the author of Growing Through Grief. She's a speaker, a mental health educator, and she's the founder of All That We Are. So thank you, Jenny, for joining us.
Thank you, Marcia, for having me. Before we get started, can we take a moment just to acknowledge those statistics? I'm covered in goosebumps just listening to it and really taking it in and recognizing the depth in which this is impacting us. And that's just here, right? That's just here in the US. And I know I've done a lot of work globally and the numbers are astounding. And so if it's okay with you, I would like to take a moment where, a lot of times when I'm giving a talk, it's one of those like, let's start with doing some breath work and just get grounded for a second and just take a nice deep breath in, right? So if everyone who's here with us, just take a nice deep breath in, hold it for just a second, and then release that breath. A nice, slow, deep breath out, right? Feel our bodies relaxing, able to receive, because I promise you that while this is a topic that can be heavy, it can be intense, it's also a topic that I'm extremely passionate to talk about, that I'm excited to talk about. And I walk this fine line whenever I'm having this conversation, because while I know the heaviness is there, I also know the excitement, because every chance I get to talk about this means that I'm in a position to support someone who's going through it. It is an absolute gift to be able to share my experiences, the lessons I've learned, the research that I've done, so that others can heal, grow, and thrive. And so one of the things I also want to say is that as we go through this conversation, if at any point someone, whether you're on here live with us or not, if you're listening and you start to feel those emotions bubbling up, because maybe this does hit close to home, whether you've lost someone or not, nearly everyone's gone through some sort of trauma, some sort of heartache. So if you feel those emotions coming up, I'd like to encourage you to feel them. I give you permission. I invite you to allow yourself to feel those emotions. And what I'd like you to do is just imagine right here in your chest, that there's a nice window to your soul, and you're just going to let those emotions flow out, right? You can name them, or you can cry, or you can simply see them leaving your body. And what I'd like you to do is imagine that as those emotions flow out, that they are alchemizing into healing energy that are going to support you and the people around you. So anytime you start to feel the emotion, rather than stuffing it down and saying like, no, not right now, not right now, let yourself feel it, right? This is the space that we are creating here, is a safe space. And if you are in a space where you can allow yourself to feel it, please do. And I promise you'll leave here feeling more empowered.
And I would add that if you are driving and listening to this, the conversation may bring up emotions that you don't even realize that you have. Yeah. So you may want to listen to this at another time. Similarly, if you have young kids in the car, if you don't think that this is a conversation they should hear, we definitely want you to listen to it. And this information will also help you as you deal with your own kids. And, Jenny, I don't know if I told you this. My son lost his first friend to suicide at age 12.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And the guilt that my son felt, that I think that still affects him to this day,
Mm,
was that he didn't know anything was wrong. Why didn't his friend come to him? Why didn't his friend say anything to him? What could he have done?
yeah.
And that has led him to be an adult that is always looking at after everybody else's needs, sometimes even before his own,
Mm,
because I think he lives with that. And by the time he was 21, he had lost several more, to either suicide or attempted suicide. So this is something that is very, very serious. And that's why I say that even if you say, well, I don't know anybody, at some point you may know, or at some point your kids or family members or colleagues may come up to you and say, how do we address this?
right.
And in the field that I'm in the legal field, we have a very, very high rate
Mm,
of serious mental well-being, mental health issues, and also a skyrocketing rate of people who take their own lives or who attempt to take their own lives. So for my lawyers who are listening, this is also really important for you.
mm,
Now you have some personal connections,
mm.
starting with losing your father. And how did this affect you at the time? And how does it affect you all these years later? Because that is the catalyst for your life's work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, before I even talk about how his death affected me, let me start by telling you that my dad was my world. I was 20 years old, and everything that I had ever done had been with the focus of making him proud. And my dad asked for help. I think that was one of the hardest things was, a lot of people say, well, men never ask for help, right? It's a silent killer. Well,
Right.
in 1998, it was November of 1998, my dad actually went to his boss and asked for help. And his boss didn't know how to help him. He didn't know how to talk about it. But what I will say is that he did the best that he could with the tools that he had. And he organized a meeting that involved my dad's boss's boss, a member from Human Resources, a representative from their insurance company, and the psychiatrist that my dad had been working with. And while they
Wow.
all met, they asked my parents to wait in the hallway. And they then made decisions on what they thought was in my dad's best interest, as well as the best interest of the company. And when I lost my dad, I was full of rage and anger and heartache, but never at my dad. I never once blamed him. I feel like I'm one of the few. I think a lot of people over the years,
Yes.
it's now been 25 years since I lost my dad, and most people I meet go through an angry phase, and that anger is at the person they lost. For me, I never experienced that, because from the moment he died, my thought was, how did I not realize how much pain he was in?
Right.
It didn't make sense to me. The stigma associated with suicide, um, that's not who my dad was. So when he died, I was angry at his company. I was angry at myself. I was angry at God. I was angry, beyond angry, at my mom. And over time, and what I learned is time does not heal all wounds. It's what we do with that time that is going to determine how and when we heal. But healing is possible. And part of that healing is forgiveness. It is letting go of these emotions. And I'd say anger is one of those toxic emotions that can eat us up. But the one that I think is the most toxic is bitterness. And so
Absolutely.
being able to let those go and focus in on finding the good. And for me, that's what I did. I was determined to understand what caused him to die, and how to navigate it. Right. So I went back to my teachers. Right. I'm getting my degree in psychology. I returned to school, and I simply let them know that he had died, that I needed to understand what happened, and that I was not okay.
Now, there's so much there to unpack.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was that you were not angry at your dad, and many times people are, right? And I think sometimes people are angry at the person because they say you gave up, right? Or, you know, you should have, you had other choices. You could have done this, you could have done that. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about, what gets somebody to the point where they even consider taking their own life.
Mm.
So, how does that play into why there is that anger and bitterness toward the person? And is that anger and bitterness really toward the person, or do you think part of it is toward that person, toward themselves,
Mm.
because I didn't catch it, I didn't see
Mhm.
it?
Mhm.
What was I missing?
I mean, I definitely would say in the last well, 4 years, I went through my own journey, spiritual awakening, got a divorce, went through a lot, learned a lot. I do not believe we can feel anything for another person if we don't first feel it for ourselves. So I do think
Right.
there is always some projection. But what I'd like to do is take a moment and talk about the stigma. And
Hmm.
in doing so, let's talk about language, and if it's okay with you, to share, language that we can use that is going to help end the stigma versus language that perpetuates it. Are you good with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So whenever I meet someone who's talking about suicide, one of the things that I do is I listen carefully to the way they talk about it. And the fact is that many of us, in fact, many advocates and mental health professionals speak about mental health in a way that perpetuates the very stigma they are trying to end simply because they are unaware. So in no way am I ever trying to shame anyone or say like, oh, you did
Mhm.
this wrong. No.
Right.
And when people are sharing their story with me or they're sharing their experiences, I don't stop them and go, oh, no, 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 no. We don't talk like that. But I will say, hey, is it okay if we talk about words in the way that they affect us? And so one of the things that I point out to people is a lesson that I learned many years ago. In fact, it was shortly after my dad died, which is that most of us are unaware that it is actually the words that we're using or that we're hearing that impacts the way we're feeling, which then impacts the way we think, which will then determine if we are reacting to a situation or if we are responding. Right. So I worked with an amazing psychologist who helped me navigate some very difficult moments after my dad died when people use terms like successful suicide and or a failed attempt. And I was like, what? Like, why would you put those words together?
Hmm.
Um, and he helped me to understand this, that people just simply are unaware of the power that these words have. And one thing that we really want to be aware of is that when we are reacting, which most people react to mental health challenges,
Right.
when we are reacting, we are acting from a place of uncertainty, fear, um, judgment, and a need to control. Okay.
Right.
When we are responding, we are acting from a place of love, compassion, understanding, and a desire to support. And there's a big difference there. And so one of the things that I'm always focused on is teaching people how we can better respond to situations. And it's not something that just happens overnight. I mean, I've been
Right.
doing this for 25 years. However, I didn't really have anyone teaching me all of the things that I was learning. So I don't think it should take anyone else 25 years to learn all of this. But one of the things we really want to be aware of is, what is the stigma? What is the stigma? Because when I ask that question globally, the number one answer I get is that the stigma is shame.
Hmm.
However, that's not the stigma. Shame is the result of the stigma. Okay? The actual stigma is the idea or belief that an individual who is going through mental health challenges, who has attempted suicide or died by suicide, is selfish, that they're weak, they are being vindictive, that they were simply a bad person, or that they were broken. Okay. At the heart of every single one of those, it is the idea that the person is choosing to be this way, or that they
Right.
have chosen to die. Okay. So if we understand that that is the heart of the stigma, is the idea that this is a choice, it's so important that we're aware of the language we're using if we truly want to end the stigma. So not only are we going to avoid the statement that is commonly avoided by most people, right? The statement
Hmm.
of committed suicide. So many people over the last 10 years have stopped using the phrase committed suicide, not because of the reasons I just told you, but because of the association between committed suicide and committing a crime. Okay.
Hmm.
They don't even make the
Okay.
connection that this is really committing, is making the choice. I am
Right.
choosing this path. Okay. So the other language that I would encourage people to remove from our language, our sentence structure. I'm blanking right now, but
It's okay.
the phrases that I would remove, that I'd like to at least raise your awareness to the fact that they perpetuate the stigma of choice, is the statement, he took his own life,
Mm-hmm.
or he killed himself. Okay. So you'll never hear me say that. You'll never hear me say that my dad took his own life or that he killed himself. What you will hear me say is, I lost my dad to suicide, or my dad died from suicide.
So tell me why that sentence structure
Mm.
is so important to you as a family member
Mm.
who lost someone to suicide, and to people who may not say, I don't really get
They're
the
like,
distinction. What are you trying? Like,
semantics,
why are
and
you parsing all
what
these words?
and why are you policing me? Right? That's
Hmm.
what I get a lot is, oh, are we going to make this politically correct too? No, and in fact, I don't police anyone. As I said, when I'm having conversations, I never say to someone like, oh, you can't say that. No, everyone's on their own journey. I simply raise their awareness to the fact that words impact the way we move forward. Okay. So if you are moving forward with a desire to heal, then I want you to reflect on this. If I were to say, my dad killed himself and I'm still really struggling with the aftermath, versus, I lost my dad to suicide and I'm still really struggling with the aftermath. Okay. My dad was taken from me. And it doesn't mean that there isn't pain there, but a level of the pain that so many people feel when they've lost someone to suicide is that the person chose it.
Right.
Right. So that anger, that judgment. And even for the people who don't believe that their loved one chose it, because they're like, no, my loved one would never choose that. Right.
Right.
This was a bad situation that only got worse. They were misunderstood, or they weren't communicating, and we didn't know. They
Hmm.
didn't know how to get help. We didn't know how to help them. But they're continuing to say he took his own life.
Right.
Something inside of them still very much is holding on to this idea that their loved one chose this path. And over the years, I have never believed that my dad chose this path, not once. And I've been able to work with so many people that if they lost someone to suicide, have called me or sent me an email and said, just by simply changing my language, it changed how I was moving forward. It changed how I felt about the person I lost.
Very, very impactful. And I think it's important because words have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And, what we say to ourselves, what we say out loud, or what we're saying subconsciously can definitely affect us because, there's books, the body keeps the score, right? You
Yeah.
keep all of that inside of you, that, like you talked about, that rage, that unforgiveness, that also has health ramifications as well.
It does.
Right. And so it is really important to focus on the language. But
Well,
I want to get to step back a little bit
yeah.
and talk about what causes somebody,
Mm.
you are an expert in this area,
Yeah.
you've indicated there's kind of three things that
There,
often come up when someone
yep.
is in that position,
There are
where things are so hopeless for
Yeah.
them. What are those three
There are
things that we
three
should be looking out for?
factors. There are three factors that when we experience these three factors, it puts us at the greatest risk of attempting or dying from suicide. And I do want to say that, but before I do, it feels really strong in me to make sure that we address, for those who have attempted suicide. And when I
Mm-hmm.
say that this is not a choice, and I get a lot of people who say, no, but I made that choice. I attempted suicide. It was my choice. Or maybe they are the family member of someone who
Mm-hmm.
attempted suicide, and they'll say, nope, it was their choice. I know it was.
Right.
Here's what I'd like everyone to understand before we go into the three factors
Sure.
is, when a person gets to the point that they are having thoughts of suicide, or they are experiencing suicidal ideation, which are two different things. Most of us have experienced thoughts of suicide, and I would say a lot of us have even experienced being suicidal. And the difference is that thoughts of suicide can be fleeting. They can come and go. It can be as simple as, I don't want to be here. I can't do this, right? So we're not actively thinking, oh, I am suicidal or I'm having thoughts of suicide. But if you really think back to the last time you were really, really angry, really hurt, those are common thoughts that we have is, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore, right?
Right.
Being actively suicidal is when we are actively thinking of ways to die, not because we're choosing to, but because a part of our brain is telling us all the ways that we could die. And I have lived through this myself on multiple occasions. And I have never been scared of anyone in my life as much as I was of myself the first time I became actively suicidal. And I didn't know how to communicate it, even though I was a trained crisis counselor and a public educator on suicide prevention. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how are we communicating with people and how are we getting the help that we need. So before we go there, though, I just want to say that when I have someone reach out to me and they're challenging this idea of, is it a choice or is it not? And I always say, healthy people do not die from suicide. And I had one gentleman who kept messaging me, we have to talk. And we got on a call and he said, hey, Jenny, I love everything that you're doing, but there's just this one thing you're getting wrong. And I said, oh yeah, what's that? And he said, well, this idea that it's not a choice, because I'm an attempt survivor and it was my choice. I made the choice. And I said, okay, would you share your story with me? And so he did. He told me his story. He told me about the situation leading up to his attempt. He told me about the attempt, his recovery, and I thanked him. And then I said, can I ask you a couple questions? And he said, absolutely. I said, first question, do you consider yourself to be healthy today? And he said, yes, of course I do. That's why I'm doing this work, is to help people know that healing's possible. And especially for men, I want them to know it's okay to ask for help. I said, perfect. Okay. Second question, knowing you're healthy today, would you choose to die from suicide? And I heard him, he's ready to answer. And then it was like I could hear my question replaying through his head. And he said, no, I wouldn't. And now I've had this conversation with lots of advocates over the years, but this one, the way that it varied was he said, would you come here to New York and teach my community what you just taught me? Because healthy people do not die from suicide.
And I want people to really hear that, because I've said it a couple of times publicly, but not very often. I have also been to the point where I didn't just think about it, where I was literally spending days researching how, and I don't want to get into too much detail because I want to be sensitive, but there is, I mean, the amount of research I did is like I was studying for the bar exam, right? And I say it in a very cavalier way right now because I'm healthy.
Yeah.
Back then, it was so serious. So, what would happen with the life insurance? And with this, like I had the whole plan. I had the letters written out because I was in such a depth of despair where I was like, what if I move to this place? Can I because I'm an overthinker. So I had to even overthink how this would happen.
Yeah.
But there's no way I would have that conversation in my head for more than 5 seconds and would just brush it off like ridiculous. But back then in those depths, and it's funny, and I'll say this, around the time that it happened, I was in a very tough time in my marriage. I actually, when I was never going to go skydiving, I finally said, I'm going to go skydiving, but not because I was suicidal, but because I didn't care. I had no fear if something would happen to me. And that was the time when I was doing all that research. So I wasn't like, I hope the parachute doesn't work. That's not what I was thinking. But I was like, and I'm terrified of heights, right? So, but now those thoughts would never come to me. And it's really important because the way you phrase it, that's how it clicked to me, right? And that's how I also started thinking of, I didn't feel like I had a choice. Like there was something that was taking over what I was thinking, that it wasn't who I am today. The person I am today would not be in that state. I'm not saying it could never happen again.
Right. And that's the thing. I meet people all the time that will say, oh, well, my child, like if I did an event that was around youth suicide prevention, and I don't have to worry about that for my child. I came because I'm worried about some of her friends, or I don't have to worry about that for me. Well, For those of us who can remember the 1980s, that's like saying, well, I'll never get HIV, or my loved one will never get HIV, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it can happen, right? It can happen because any one of us can experience these three factors at one time. And especially if we have not been trained to look for them, if we are not aware that we can actually intervene on our own behalf, then we are going to be at risk. And I say this again as someone who was trained in this in two different states. I was trained in California and Minnesota after getting my degree in psychology. And yet I went through postpartum depression and I became suicidal. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to say to anyone, I'm scared of myself. I'm
Right.
scared to go in the kitchen. I'm scared to drive my car. I'm scared to go in the bathroom, you know? And the way that I describe it in my book, Growing Through Grief, was that it was like I had two brains. I had my healthy brain that would say, get out of bed, take care of the baby, eat, take a shower, you know, go for a walk. And then I had my suicidal brain that was constantly telling me how I could die, you know, just constant nonstop. And the problem was that as it went on, my healthy brain got quieter and quieter, and my suicidal brain got louder and louder. And I can tell you that this is where I'm fortunate. I'm fortunate that I had the right people in my life at the right time, and that one day my now ex-husband, but at the time my husband, walks in, finds me sitting in the dark holding our daughter who was the only reason I was alive at that point. Right? I was scared to
Yep.
put her down because she was keeping me alive. And he simply asked me what was going on, and I said, I'm scared I'm going to die. And this is where I can tell you now. In that moment I didn't realize it, but now I can tell you my dad's death saved my life. You know, because my ex-husband, he understood what I was saying. He knew to take me serious. And he also knew what had helped me after my dad died, when I had begun having panic attacks and was shutting down. And so he not only said, hey, let's get you back into acupuncture, right? Because that's what had helped me after my dad died. He actually set up the appointments for me. He actually went and did the work to come home once a week and take care of our daughter, knowing that I was barely functioning. Like, quite literally, I was barely functioning. And so I am grateful to this day, and I always will be, for the way that he took care of me during that time, and the way that he recognized what my needs were and how to help me, you know?
So, what are those three things
Yeah.
we should be looking for? Because we haven't yet
I
said them.
know. So those
Um,
three
and
factors. Yeah.
and I think the three factors are really important for people listening, because we might have heard this expression, check on your strong friend, right? And there are people who may look like they've got it all together. Back when I had those thoughts, and I've had them more than once,
Mm-hmm.
right? um, it was, nobody would have thought that on the outside.
Yeah.
And partly because I was isolating, and I know that's one of the issues. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
go through
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the three
So the
factors.
three factors are: number one, extreme distress. Okay. Two is isolation, and three is a shift in belief. And so I'd like to break those down, because while they may seem obvious, there's more depth to them than what's on the surface level. So with extreme distress, many people would think divorce, job loss, death in the family. However, when someone's mental health is compromised, which can be from having a cold, okay, we can experience mental health fatigue from lack of sleep, from having a cold, from having the flu, right? And that
Mhm.
moment, our mental health is compromised. At that point, any type of distress that to the average person would seem like nothing could be significant to someone. So then you go, okay, well, how am I supposed to know if they're going through extreme distress? Well, they're going to show up in two ways, right? It's either going to be that they are fixated on one problem as being the biggest problem ever, or everything is a problem. Either way, what you're going to see is a fixation on the negative, and especially if this is out of character. So if you notice someone who suddenly is just like, whenever you talk to them, it's just negative, negative, negative. For me, had I known to look for this, I would have realized that my dad was going through extreme distress, because I was there in person visiting back in Texas. And for 3 days straight, he kept talking about getting a bad haircut. And I just kept saying, Dad, you've had the same haircut my whole life, right? It doesn't look any different. Like, I just was like, what are you talking about? But the thing is that when someone's at that point, oftentimes they don't know how to communicate what they're feeling. And sometimes they don't even know why. So even if they said, I feel suicidal, or I'm having thoughts of suicide, and then what is the number one response? But why? But why? What's the matter with you? What's wrong? Okay, I'm just going to ask everyone in this moment, please take it in. That's not how to respond to someone when they say that they're suicidal. Okay? Isn't to jump into why, isn't to jump into what happened, not into fix it mode. Simply love them. In that moment, if someone is brave enough to tell you that they are having thoughts of suicide or feeling suicidal, simply love them. And then after that, you can ask, would you like to talk about it more? Would you like to explore possibilities? Okay. But what they need more than anything, first and foremost, is to know that they are loved. And we're going to get to that. So it's why it's so important. Now let's look at isolation. We all experienced isolation during 2020, some of us more than others. And for some of us, really enjoyed it, right? I personally did not. I like my people. Marcia, you know this. I like to be
I
around
know
my
you do.
people.
Yeah.
I found isolation extremely difficult. But here's what we want to know about isolation is it is not simply a person spending time alone. Okay. In fact, some of the most extreme isolation can be when we're surrounded by people, but we're not able to communicate what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing out of fear of being judged, shamed, or ridiculed. One of the things that we want to pay attention to is this person, whether they're alone or with us, what is their energy like? Are they engaging or are they withdrawing? Are they shutting down? Right? So my younger daughter, she loves her alone time. I mean, loves it. So I can't think every time she wants to go spend time alone, oh, she's suicidal. No, no. But what I can pay attention to is, has her behavior changed in the way that she's going to spend time alone? Does she seem a little bit different? And then just as I was saying, like when someone's going through something, don't just simply say what's wrong or why. If we notice a shift in someone's behavior, if they seem to be in distress or they seem to be isolating themselves, rather than simply going to them and saying, hey, what's going on? You're normally such a fun person. Like, hey, Marcia, you're normally so much fun.
Right.
What's wrong with you? Why aren't you being fun? Why aren't you talking? Is that going to create a space for you to open up and say, well, actually, here's where I'm at? You know? So I sat with my daughter, recognizing that I didn't want to be a helicopter mom. But I also didn't want to seem like I was completely void of any kind of awareness either. And so I had a conversation with her and I said, how would you like for me to communicate to you if I notice a shift in your behavior? And I want to check in, but I don't want to, assume that something's wrong. And after our conversation, what we agreed to was that whenever I say to her, hey, is there anything you'd like to talk about? That was code for, I've noticed a shift. I'm not assuming anything's wrong, but I am paying attention, right? And in fact, that brings me to another quick point that a lot of times we find ourselves worrying about people. And we might even think that if we tell someone, I'm worried about you, that that's a sign of love. I'm going to invite you to take a moment to think about what you're really saying when you say, I'm worried about you. What you're saying is, I don't believe you can figure this out. So rather than saying, I'm worried about you, I invite you to explore things like, I'm paying attention. I've observed this shift in your behavior. I've observed this difference in the way you're showing up. I'm paying attention. I'm noticing, right? You matter to me.
That's a really important reframe. And I know you also have, and we'll put links to your site, you have a page about how to have some of these conversations. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to tell your story
Mhm.
in a way that is helpful and empowering to people. But the language is really important because I have made every single mistake that you've talked about for the past 34 minutes. So, and I'll probably
It's a,
make them again later, but at least if you're aware, you know better, you do better.
There you go. It's about raising awareness. Like I said, this for me, it's not about policing. And it's definitely not about bringing shame on anyone. And I didn't learn these, on my own. I learned them through experiences. You said at the very beginning, my area of expertise in this doesn't come from just sitting and reading a book. This has been living it, losing my dad, going through my own challenges, almost losing my daughter.
And I want to talk about that, right?
We
Because
should go, before we forget
let's go
though,
to factor number 3,
yeah,
and then I want to talk about your
yeah,
daughter.
okay. So factor number 3, that shift in belief. I believe that we are born with the belief that this world is good, that we are perfect, and that we are deeply loved. And as we go through life, we face different challenges that can make us start to question those beliefs. Those are our core innate beliefs that are deep within us, but we begin to question them. Now, when it becomes dangerous is when we get to the point where we are no longer simply questioning them. Our belief turns into a false belief, which is, this world is no good. There is only pain. I am unworthy of love. I am a burden on the people around me. Nobody needs me. Nobody wants me. So when we start to believe those things and you combine it with the isolation and the extreme distress, is when someone is at the greatest risk for suicide. And, as I mentioned earlier, when I went through my own challenges now 20 years ago, that I honestly thought I was so bad off that I couldn't do anything to help myself. But I now realize that that's not true. It's just that what I had been taught, what I'd been trained in, and what I was training others in wasn't working. Because now, when I approach it with the knowledge that I have after living this and doing this for so long, I know how to pull myself out of it. And a lot of it is that awareness piece, right? Paying attention to, am I going through extreme distress? Okay, if I am, who do I reach out to? Who can I talk to about this? Do I feel like I'm starting to pull away from people? Am I isolating? Well, if I have the awareness that I am and that could put me in danger, who am I going to reach out to? Are my beliefs shifting? Who am I going to reach out to? And one of the things that I do to keep myself safe is that on my phone, I have saved next to certain people's names a little emoji that is the smiley face covered in hearts. They are my safe people. That way, if I'm ever in a moment of distress, because when we're in a moment of distress, we are not thinking clearly. So if I'm
Absolutely.
in that moment, and especially if I'm new to this, right? I've been doing this for a long time and I've learned how to navigate it pretty well. But even then, there's still times where I reach out to someone. It makes it so much easier to remember who I can reach out to when I put that emoji. That's all I have to remember. That smiley face with the hearts, I put that in my search in my contacts, and boom, my list of people, my safe people pop up. And that's who I
Wow.
can message, you know? And as I mentioned, that with my daughter, what we say is there anything you want to talk about? With my friends, the code is, I didn't make my bed today, or I didn't feel like making my bed today. Because I realized a couple of years ago that when I am at my worst, I don't make my bed. And I shared this with a friend of mine, and she said, "Hey, Jenny, the next time that you can't make your bed, just let me know." And I want to remind you that in this moment, if I send that message or receive that message, it isn't a time to dive in and say, well, what's wrong? How can I fix it? How can I support you? That is a time to pour love into the other person, right?
So how do you do that without saying, how can I support you? Because some people see already making more mistakes, right? Could be
No,
saying,
it's okay.
okay, I don't want to say what's wrong. I'll say, how can I support
Yeah.
you? Why is that?
So when you
Why
say
is that not
how
the best
can,
thing to do?
it's not that it's a bad thing if you say how can I support you, because you are saying I'm like, I don't know what to do. When someone is at that point, whether they're going through grief because they've lost a job, a relationship, they've lost a loved one, you name it, right? Death comes in many forms. And when someone's going through grief, one of the hardest things is to tell people what you need. We're not trained to do this. We're not raised to be like, I have needs. Here's what they are.
Right.
Like even when we're healthy,
Right. It's
how
true.
often do we
It's
say,
true.
here's my boundaries, here's what I need to remain healthy? So now imagine I've just gone through a loss, or I'm feeling suicidal, and I'm supposed to tell you what I need? Like, oh, like I can't.
You're right.
And I used to say to people, there, look, as long as you're approaching someone from a place of love, there is no right or wrong thing to say. But we have to remember that they're not always going to receive us the way that we intended, right? So like right after my dad died, I walked into my parents' house. It was my first time back at their house, and I walk in the door, and a man walks up to me, and I kind of recognized him from my childhood, but I wasn't entirely sure who he was. But he hugged me, and in that moment, he said, "Your dad didn't go to hell." And I was like, "What?" I mean, I was about ready to hit this man.
That's the kind of thing somebody in my family would say, by the
Okay,
way.
and
So,
here's the thing, Marcia. I
whole
was
bunch of
angry
Catholics.
at him for 15
Yeah.
years. For 15
Yeah.
years, I was angry at him. And then I gave my book, like before it had become a book, I gave it to a really good friend of mine who I'd grown up with, who's now both a minister and a psychologist. And I gave it to her and said, would you please read this and let me know what you think? And we were talking through the different parts, and I was sharing with her about this particular man, and how angry it made me, and how, like, why don't we teach people how to respond? And she said, you know, Jenny, I guarantee you that in that moment, he thought he was doing the right thing. In that moment,
Exactly.
that was the best that he had. So while I encourage people that if you're going to reach out to someone from a place of love, I'm also going to encourage everyone that's listening right now. Again, this is about raising awareness. And once we raise awareness, we're more in tune. When we are in that place of pain and someone reaches out to us, remember to receive them from a place of love. The best that you can, okay? And that no one take anything personal in this moment. I mean, I've learned through Zen and Buddha not to take anything personal ever, working on it still. But especially when you see that another person's in pain,
Mm-hmm.
be the stability that they need in that moment. Be the anchor and say, okay, they're hurting. I'm going to do my best to stay calm. And if I can't stay calm in their presence, I'm going to step away for a few minutes. But one of the things that was said to me that changed my world was in 2022 while I was on a trip. I was actually at a wellness festival, and this was like day 5, and we had taken a bus. We were in Jordan and had been staying at the Dead Sea, and we took a bus to go see Petra. And as we were driving back, I'm sitting on this bus. I'm reflecting on my life and everything that's been going on, and our bus was fairly empty, and I was sitting at the back, curled up in a ball, and a tear just streams down my cheek. And I've got my eyes closed, and the next thing I know, I feel a hand on my hand. And the guy sitting in front of me, he's just holding my hand. Okay? Next thing I know, I am being picked up and scooted over, and I've got an arm around me, and now this person that's picked me up, this other guy, he's holding my other hand. And he said the most beautiful thing I think I've ever heard. He said, we've got you, Jenny. You're safe. You can let it out. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He didn't ask me how he could help. He didn't try to fix me. And the thing was, in that moment, at first, like, I just was like, I don't even know why I was crying, right? It was just tear. Well, then I started sobbing. I mean, sobbing.
Right.
But here was the beautiful thing. Those sobs turned into laughter because I suddenly became very aware of the fact that both of my hands were being held by 2 different men, and that I had a massive amount of snot pouring down my face. And so I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I barely know these people, right? Like, we've been in the same
Right.
space for 5 days, but they weren't people I knew
Yeah.
well. But in any case, I finally was like, hey guys, this is really beautiful, but could one of you please let me have my hand back so I can wipe my nose?
Too much
Yeah,
support
too
right
much
now.
more. So, but yeah, so it's this, don't get caught up in necessarily saying the perfect thing. We are all human. Approach people from a place of love. And remember that if they don't receive you from a place of love, they are hurting, and you can try again later. One of the things that also happened that I want to share, because I think it'll give people context and how you can use these 3 factors to help someone you might be worried about.
And repeat the 3 factors again
Yeah.
one more time.
So I'm actually going to repeat them in this story. Okay.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. So, let's say no one's reached out to you, but you notice something different, right? So in February 2021, I received a phone call from a very good friend of mine, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. And he says to me, he says, "Hey, Jenny, you taught me the 3 factors that put someone at the greatest risk for suicide, and I'm worried about you." He said, "I know that you're going through extreme distress right now because of your divorce. I haven't heard from you in almost 2 weeks, which makes me think that you're isolating yourself. So tell me, in this moment, what are you thinking? What do you believe?" Now, he's someone I love dearly. He's one of my closest friends, but he'd been going through his own challenges. So he wasn't someone I would have reached out to say, "I'm not okay." But in that moment, he was such an incredible source of stability who approached me from such a place of love, compassion, and understanding that I said to him, "I'm not okay. I don't even think my girls need me at this point." And he said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said, "No, no, no. It's late." And he lived about 30 minutes away. And he said, "Okay, then we're going to stay on the phone." And that's what we did, is we stayed on the phone and we talked. And the thing was, I was going through this divorce and not wanting to talk about it because I didn't want my friends to feel like they had to choose, because it was an amicable divorce. But even
Right.
amicable divorces, I had no idea. I'd been with him since I was 18 years old. And now all of a sudden, it's now 23 years later, and my whole world is just flipped upside down. I don't have anyone to talk to. It was isolating. It was lonely. It was terrifying. And he gave me a safe space where he gave me permission to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. And so we did. And by the time we hung up the phone, he had pulled me out of my isolation, had alleviated my distress. And by doing those 2 things, he brought me back to center so that I knew that my girls needed me. It's that simple.
So we're thinking extreme distress, isolation, and shift in belief.
Mm-hmm.
And you've talked about your struggles.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about your dad's struggles, but your daughter, we talked about, don't know if your girls needed you. Well, clearly they did, and you were there for them, because one of your daughters, when she was 15, went through some real difficulties. And if anybody's going to be prepared to deal with it, that's you. But can anybody really be prepared
Yes.
for the thought of possibly losing their 15-year-old daughter? So give us an idea of what happened there, to the extent that you are comfortable sharing it.
Yeah.
And what can parents be thinking about if their daughter comes to them, or especially if their daughter doesn't, or son doesn't come to them?
First and foremost, just let me say my thoughts, prayers, and love are with anyone that is listening right now. And again, whether you listen to this in live time or played back, I believe in the power of energy and the power of love. And if you are needing some love right now, please feel this love that I'm sending out and sharing it with you, because I do know. I do know what it is to lose someone, to go through myself, and I know what it is to almost lose someone. And the pain that comes from having a child that you can see all the good, you can see all the possibilities, and yet it just seems like nothing is working. And for me, it was like, but this is what I do. I teach people about wellness. See, I don't believe in traditional suicide prevention. That's what I was trained in over 20 years ago. And that is currently what is being used in mainstream suicide prevention approach. It's not working. I teach wellness, right? But oh my gosh, I almost lost my own daughter, so it's not working. What is happening? And this is where I can tell you. And I also want to say, she has given me permission to talk about this.
Right. And I would have assumed so. Otherwise, I would not have asked.
No, yeah.
I know you've spoken about it a little bit publicly. So
so, and she has too. She's also given some talks, but as much as it was so painful to go through that time, and as much as my heart hurt as she had attempted suicide and it was brought to my attention, I am grateful because it was a moment for me to recognize what I was doing wrong, and I was doing something wrong. So while I was doing all the things that I was teaching, like go try acupuncture, go try Reiki, go work with a naturopathic doctor or a holistic chiropractor, and go do blood work, like I was doing all the stuff.
Right.
So where did I go wrong? Everything that I was doing was coming from a place of fear. Everything that I was doing was coming from a need to fix her, to fix the situation. So after she came home, after I'd learned that she had attempted, I sat with her and this just came through me. And it was this me saying to her, Kaylee, I realized that my greatest fear isn't that you're going to die. My greatest fear is that you are going to live a life of misery and you're going to seek out drugs and alcohol as a way to self-medicate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, don't get me wrong, I'd be devastated if she died, but even worse,
Right.
because I've seen it with my siblings, this life of drugs and alcohol. And I said, and I learned a long time ago that making decisions based on fear never ends well. And yet that's all I've been doing. I've been so scared to come in the mornings to wake you up or to check on you or to even tell you I love you that I haven't been doing them. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to live this way. I'm no longer going to simply try to keep you alive. I am going to fight for you to live a life you love. Everything changed for me. Everything changed.
Right.
For her, it took time. It took time. And it was about 6 months later that we were on a plane. We were flying for her to give a talk on this. And I asked her if she remembered that conversation. And she goes like, yeah, you really pissed me off. And I was like, what? What do you mean? I was pouring my heart out to you. And she was like, whoa, whoa, yeah. But Mom, you know better than anyone when someone's in that much pain, they don't hear what you're saying. They hear what they are feeling. And
Well,
all,
I need you to say that. I
yeah.
need you to say that again, because that's might be the most important sentence here, especially for people who'll say, I did everything. I took them to therapists. I did this. I changed their diet. I took them off gluten, whatever it is that, because as parents or as friends or as loved ones, we will do anything to help someone we think is suffering because we want to help alleviate that.
Right. So I'm gonna actually say it differently. I am not hearing what you're saying. I'm hearing what I'm feeling. Okay. So even though I was doing all of this stuff and I was saying all the things, I think I said that not for her, but for me to realize that it was time to shift. What she was feeling from me in that moment, though, anger, frustration, bitterness, doubt, uncertainty, fear, right? Because those were the emotions that were going on inside of me that I had not released, that I had not worked through before I went and sat with her. And some of them naturally are going to come to the surface as I'm sitting with my daughter for the first time, right after I've learned that she attempted. But we want to be mindful of that. If our emotions are starting to get the best of us, move away. Say, I love you. I need a moment. Okay? Step away. It is better for us to step away, get grounded, be composed, be in tune with what we're feeling, because energy is powerful. Emotions are powerful. And when someone is in pain, they are feeling your energy more than they are hearing your words.
Very helpful. Yeah. Now, it's interesting. And so, well, I don't believe in stupid questions. Is there a hereditary component to suicide? You have your father who, died by suicide, your daughter who attempted, and you who've had the ideations more than once. Is there any kind of evidence about about whether there's a hereditary component, or is it the pain of losing someone to suicide that leads to the kind of despair, the isolation, the extreme distress, those kinds of things?
So the way that I experience it, the way that I look at it, I'm not a scientist. I'm not even an official researcher. I do a ton of research on my own.
Right.
Um, but the way that it makes sense to me is that just like any other health condition, because that's really what we need to look at this as, any other health condition, diabetes, blood pressure, our heart health, our brain health, like all of those things, there are genetic components. That being said, I have been diagnosed with 5 physical health conditions that were all genetic conditions. That some people would say, oh, yeah, you're predisposed. It's normal that you'd have it. Okay. Yes. So between the age of 20 and I think it was 36, roughly, I had been diagnosed with 5 conditions. I have reversed them all through lifestyle and nutrition. Okay. So even though there is a genetic component to it, the way that I look at it is it's meant to raise your awareness. Yes, I have family members who've had high blood pressure. Yes, I have family members who have had cancer. Yes, I have family members who have had mental health challenges that go much deeper than my dad, right? His mom died from suicide, which I didn't learn until much, much later in my life. Her mom, before her, had a frontal lobotomy during postpartum depression because that's how they handled that back then, right? So yes, there is absolutely a genetic component to this. Or you could also look at it as, of course, I'm going to blank now. Marcia, it's shoot, we're going to have to come back to it. I can't believe I'm blanking on it, but
you're thinking of epigenetics?
Yes, the epigenetics that can be passed down as well, right? So yes, I believe in all of that. However, while no one chooses to go through mental health challenges, no one chooses to become suicidal or to act on it, we can choose to fight for a life we love, right? So every day you can make decisions around your self-care, right? There are 3 types of self-care, and most people have no idea. But we have our daily routine self-care. We have indulgent self-care. That's my favorite. And then we have responsive self-care, which is how are we taking ourselves during moments of crisis? Okay. So all of those things are going to affect us. Now, one of the things that I also like to talk about, like beyond genetics and that the role that it plays, but is this idea that suicide is contagious, the contagion effect. I do not believe that suicide is contagious. And I will say that in every direction because I do not believe it's like strep throat. Okay. What I do think is contagious is that shift in belief. So that's why when Robin Williams died, we saw, several other people dying and people are like, oh, it's the contagion effect. And it's like, no, it's not that. It's not because it's contagious. It's because someone looks at a situation or a person like Robin Williams and says, well, if he couldn't do it, how can I? He had everything, not knowing really everything that was going on.
Exactly.
Right? So then you have a person who looks up to someone or sees them as having everything. And then this idea of like, well, if they couldn't make it in this world, how could I? And that's what's contagious. And that's what we want to pay attention to. And that is why also the power of love is so very important. Because as I was saying before, that shift in belief, includes the idea that we are unworthy of love. And I always let people know, it does not matter if you are a man living in New York City and you are beyond wealthy, or you are a woman living in California and you are homeless. The one thing that they have in common when they get to that point of being suicidal is that feeling of being unworthy of love. And I remember having a conversation with a male advocate out of the UK at one point, and he said, no, I've been doing this. I've never heard a man say that he didn't feel loved and that's why he attempted suicide. And I was like, oh, let's talk about this. He's like, what I hear men say is, well, I lost my job and I didn't feel like I could provide for my family and that was it. And I was like, And if we go deeper, like they might not consciously be aware of it, but if we go deeper, when they lost their job and couldn't provide for their family, did they feel worthy of love? Right? That is at the core. And that is why I was saying, if someone reaches out to you in that moment of asking for support or saying that they need support, rather than judging them, rather than questioning them, I'm like, oh, it can't be that bad. Simply love them. That's it. And sometimes we have to love people from a distance. I do want to say that. Sometimes, I've been very fortunate. I have an incredible relationship with both of my daughters. And I was able to support Kaylee to make that transition from suicidal to thriving. And I want to be clear, I supported her. She did the work, and she continues to do the work because she's continuing to surprise me with the ways that she is growing and evolving. And is it on the typical standard American timeline of graduate from high school, go straight to college? And no, she's on her own timeline. And yet it's working out beautifully. That's one of the things I think that allows us to thrive, is to recognize, what is it that I as a person need in order to truly thrive, and what does thriving look like for me? And I remember the first time I ever said that Kaylee had shifted from suicidal to thriving, and I had a few people reach out to me and say, Jenny, if this is what you call thriving, I'm concerned. Like, she's barely graduating from high school. And I said, well, I think you and I have different definitions on what it means to thrive. Because I have a daughter whose boyfriend broke up with her, and instead of going and getting drunk or getting high or sitting down in her cave in the basement, that we like to call it, she came to me and said, I need help. Can I sleep with you tonight? How did you get through this? Right? Or the time that there was a party where her ex-boyfriend now planned, and he invited everyone except for her, including her best friends.
Oh my gosh.
And she came to me, and she not only didn't go do anything to cause harm to herself, which was an old pattern that she had. She came to me and she said, Mom, can I ask you a favor? I said, yeah, what's that? And she said, can you please take all the alcohol out of the house? Because Ev's having this party and all I want to do is get drunk. But I know it's not good for me. That to me was thriving. That's thriving with grit.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's one of the things we need to understand.
People that are 40 years old that wouldn't have that awareness of what they need and they don't need.
And that's where, one of the things I teach in the course that we're going to be coming out with soon is that there's two types of thriving. There's thriving with grit. And I think it's important that we understand this, because thriving with grit doesn't always feel good. In fact, it often doesn't feel good. But we have this awareness that life could be better, that we could be healthier, and we are actively pursuing that life. Then we have thriving with ease. This is when we are in flow, right? Everything's just coming to us naturally and easily. And I'll even admit, I'm not thriving with ease all day, every day. I'm not there yet. I would like to believe at some point I will. But things happen, right? Moments happen. If you're a homeowner, like, things happen and you're like, oh, okay, time to cut down trees, or time to fix the kitchen, right? Our mental, physical, and emotional health is very similar to that as a car or a house. And yet we act as if these bodies are just supposed to go, do, be, and we don't maintain them. We have to maintain them, and we have to start looking at the fact that this is not simply our mental health. This is the connection between our physical, mental, and emotional health.
Absolutely. Let's go back to young people for a minute. Why do you think the rate of suicide is rising among young people? They're more connected than ever with their devices, but more isolated than ever in certain ways, right? And is it all social media's fault? Is that the easy cop-out way, or is there something else happening?
Yeah. Well, I look at it again, looking at this from our physical, mental, and emotional health. And for me, it's about taking a comprehensive approach. You see, when I had taken all the steps to support Kaylee through this, parents started calling me and saying, what did you do? What was the one thing? And I would say to them, it wasn't one thing. And I would end up on calls for, sometimes 2-3 hours with parents who were facing these challenges with their kids. And finally, I actually wrote down all the things that we did. It was 17 things that we did within the first 6 months after she had attempted suicide. So when I look at the big picture and I think, like, why, not just with our youth, but in general, why are we seeing this increase? Well, one, we are talking about it more. So in the
Right.
past, it wasn't always documented. And not that I'm saying
Which means
talking,
why those statistics in the beginning might not even be likely
yeah, that's
very
what I mean. So,
underreported.
so I'm not saying by talking about it more, we're creating it.
Right.
However, I do think that we need to learn how to talk about it in a healthy and effective way. That simply talking about it more isn't the answer. Learning how to talk about it safely is going to help. But it was more to the point that the statistics aren't quite accurate, I don't believe.
Right.
But when we really look at like root causes, I believe that one of the biggest root causes is high levels of toxicity. And when I'm talking about toxicity, I'm talking about, yes, the screens that we're watching. What are we choosing to watch? Are we watching TV shows, social media, news, things that are causing us even more angst, more irritability, more aggression? Or are we watching things that bring us joy? Are we watching things that enlighten us, that actually help us to achieve more and be more? I'll admit that I have a tendency to take on personalities of other people or things if I'm like consistently exposed to it. And I think this is true for a lot of people. So this, I don't know why, but we had this tradition for a little while that we would watch The Sopranos every Christmas, which is a weird
Okay.
Christmas thing to watch, but we would. And I would become Tony Soprano, right? Like, and I would just start dropping the F bomb and I would just be like, I'm going to shoot that person. Like it was
Right.
crazy, like the way that I would do it. We want to pay attention to what are we reading? What are we watching? What are we listening to? So our music, is it helping us or is it hurting us? A lot of people turn to music when they are going through something difficult, and I get it. When you hear a song that speaks to whatever pain you just experienced, you're like, oh, I'm not alone. They get me, right? And
And they play it on repeat.
put it on repeat. Guess what happens? Okay, it just becomes a thing that we live by, right? There's a reason that we see musicians who die from suicide, and think about it. They're up there on that stage singing their darkest moment over and over and over again,
Wow.
and not even realizing the harm that is causing to themselves. And so we want to have that awareness and that recognition. I'm not saying it's a bad song, don't ever listen to it, but if you're gonna, I like to do this thing where I'll turn on like my heartache songs, right? And I'll give myself, like, I don't know, 10-15 minutes of like, okay, I'm just gonna cry it out, or I'm gonna yell, I'm gonna scream, I'm gonna do whatever I need to do, and then boom, switch it to a song that's gonna bring me joy or bring me peace, bring me comfort. I'm really big into listening to different frequencies that are about
Yes.
calming the body, activating the subconscious mind, and bring it up. Um, so we have toxicity when it comes to what we're watching, reading, listening to, but we also have high levels of toxicity from the things that we are eating,
Yep.
from the products we are putting on our body. Um, and somehow the FDA believes that this is okay. Products that are allowed in the US that are not even allowed in Europe,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? And the thing is, we also are the most sedentary group of people that I think has ever existed. So while we're consuming all of these toxic chemicals on so many different levels, we just sit and we just let it ruminate in our body. So I know for me that um, I have a sensitive system. So if I am all of a sudden feeling like a shift in my energy of maybe just really feeling like a depressive episode coming on or anxiety coming on, I immediately, like, I need to detox. And so it's just like, what did I eat, what did I consume, and really
Mhm.
truly pay attention to the lotions you're using, pay attention to the skincare products, but also the supplements that you're taking. I was working with a family at one point whose daughter went from being straight A's, had never missed a day of school, to not being able to get out of bed. And we were talking about, what was going on. And then in one of our conversations, they happened to mention that she had started taking a supplement because she was feeling really insecure about her hair and nails. And I said, when did she start taking the supplement? About a month before she stopped getting out of bed, about before she became this lethargic, sedentary person that couldn't function. And I said, have her stop taking the supplement. There are so many healthy supplements out there that are full of toxic chemicals. And the thing is that our bodies are processing so much that they start to shut down, you know? So we want to do what we can to reduce the amount of toxins we are absorbing. And then we also want to regularly exercise. And for me, detoxing is anything from, going from a run, sweating. Okay? I don't care if you're rock climbing, if you're rollerblading, if you're running, I don't care. Find something that's going to cause you to sweat. Go sit in a sauna, but then also you can do like Epsom salt baths. You can use essential oils, but listen to your body. It communicates with us. So be cautious, especially if you're doing any type of detox that involves consuming products. I did a detox at one point that was like all the rage and ended up with leaky gut because I didn't realize my body personally, it couldn't handle the apple cider vinegar mixed with pineapple juice and cayenne pepper, whatever. But I believed it was going to be the thing,
Right.
So listen to your bodies. And, I highly recommend people working with a naturopathic doctor, but I do think it's the level of toxins that is truly a root cause for the number of mental health challenges that we're facing.
So that brings up another couple of issues before we close out. So you've had to take care of people who have struggled with mental health issues. You've had your own mental health issues. There are a lot of people listening who they may be healthy, but they are overwhelmed because they are taking care of somebody, not necessarily who has, attempted suicide or anything like that, but just who are dealing with significant mental health challenges, and they want to support them. And even if they didn't want to support them, they have the responsibility, so they don't have a choice, which then can lead to deterioration in their mental, physical, and emotional health.
Yeah.
So what do you say, and what advice do you give to somebody who's overwhelmed by the responsibility and who might even feel kind of some resentment about it?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think first and foremost, it's understanding what is the role that we play. How responsible are we for others? And especially once they become adults. And I have two siblings who took a path that after my dad died that has led to drugs and alcohol. And does it mean that I don't help them at all? No, actually it doesn't. I do help them. I provide support in daily. I know this might sound a little cheesy, but again, I believe in the power of energy. And I say a prayer daily. That's my gratitude prayer, and saying I am grateful for the health and wellness of each person in my life. And it's much longer than that, but I won't go into it. But it is that just energetically sending my love, sending healing energy their way. There have been times where I have loaned them money, even when everyone else around me is like, don't do it. And I've made the decision to say, I am. And I've said it with an understanding is I will loan this to you. I'm not going to ask what it's for, with the expectation that you will pay me back. And if you pay me back and then further down the road, you need to borrow money again, I will loan it to you again. But if you do not pay me back, this is it. Do not call and ask me for more money, because at a certain point they have to take responsibility. Right. But I think one of the biggest things that you were alluding to, even when you were asking the question, is it's taking care of ourselves first, right? Putting ourselves as the priority. We rarely do that. We're not raised to do that. So even earlier when I was talking about the 3 types of self-care, responsive self-care is the hardest one for people to implement. And partly because we've been raised, especially women have been
Mm-hmm.
raised to say, oh, you're hurting, let me take care of you,
Yeah.
and let's be honest for a second, it's oftentimes easier to support someone else through their challenges than to face our
Than to
own.
deal with your own shit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you're a
Yeah.
little bit detached, you're a little bit removed.
I've never been guilty of that. I've just heard that happens,
Yeah,
I
but
might know some people who've done that.
it does take practice, and it does take making yourself a priority.
Right.
I believe that there's 6 types of suicide. And while most people know, if they know of me, they know I lost my dad to suicide because my dad died from a mental illness induced suicide. Um, what they don't know is I lost my mom as well to suicide. My mom was a detached suicide, meaning that she just stopped living. She stopped taking care of herself. Now, even though she had stopped taking care of herself, she continued to take care of everyone around her, you know? And and I think that one of the biggest things that I would invite people to do, it was a game changer for me, because after my mom died, I just remember sitting at her funeral and all these people getting up and talking about the incredible woman she was and how she constantly gave and she gave and she gave, and the lives that she changed. And I sat there and I looked over at my siblings. I looked at my nieces and nephews. I looked at my own children, and I thought, excuse my language for a second, but who the fuck cares? Look at how broken her family is. You guys are all up there
Right.
talking about leaving a legacy? No, no, I will live my legacy. And that legacy is loving the people in my life. And loving them doesn't mean that I give them everything they want. Sometimes loving them is doing the hard thing. Loving them is forcing them to take responsibility. Loving them truly requires me to love myself. And for me, it became this mission, during 2020. I lost my mom in 2019, but in 2020 it really began this development of, what do I need? Right? And I think one of the
Mm-hmm.
questions that changed my life, and I would invite everyone to ponder on, is knowing I do not have control over the people, place, or things. What do I want to experience in this life? So this is a vision board like no other, okay? I don't want you to put a vision board up of like your dream man or your dream house or the fancy cars. No, that stuff, it can come later. But until you set your foundation in what you truly wish to experience, for me, it was honesty, trust, laughter, meaningful connection, soulful love, right? Get really clear on it. And that, it changed my life. Not answering it once. I actually wrote it on my dry erase board in my office, and every day I would sit and I'd look at the answer. And then I went and I asked myself, am I living those things? Am I actually experiencing them? Because here's the thing, Marcia, I had the dream life. Right? I was in a 9,000 square foot house in one of the richest cities in Minnesota. We were on almost 3 acres of land. We had the pool. Our basement was a child's dream. All right, we had the ping pong table. We had the arcade machines. I mean, it was over the top craziness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a house with almost nothing, very, very poor. Married, we didn't have much, but we built this life together. And in 2020, my children came to me and said, are you getting a divorce? And I was like,
Mm.
what? No, why would you ask me that? Like, we don't even fight. They came to me separately about a week apart. And at this point, Kaylee had been healthy, right? Kaylee had attempted suicide in January of 2019. And this is now May of 2020. And she said, but Mom, this is what you do. You help people to live their best life, and you're never going to live yours as long as you're married to him.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and Grace, so Kaylee was 16, Grace was 13, and Grace said, but you're not happy. And I said, what? But I am. Like, what are you talking about? We have a great life. And what I realized is she was right. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't happy either. And this is why I always say it isn't enough to save a life. It's about living a life you love. Figuring out what it is that you truly wish to experience. Really hone in on that, make it a priority, and it will start falling into place. Even though sometimes it may feel hard, it may feel challenging, but if you really stay focused on what it is you wish to experience, it will come.
So when we think about some of the people who are listening here who might say, all right, I've got the talking points, I know what not to say, I know what to say, how can I make this broader? So I'm in the school system, or I'm a teacher, or I am a boss at a company, or I have a bunch of employees, or I'm the head of wellness at my company.
Yeah.
What are a couple of tangible things besides hiring you to consult and come and
I
speak
was
with
going
them,
to say,
right?
well,
Which we encourage
yeah,
them to do, but so don't give everything away.
yeah,
But what are some tangible things that may not cost a lot, right?
yeah,
Because we don't want to give anybody an excuse.
right.
So one of the things that I've done is, my university offered, to people to get mental health first aid certified. It's not the only thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it still raises awareness.
Yeah.
And at least I know, even if I didn't have personal experience dealing with all these issues, at least I know, okay, this is something I've got to make sure that I get this person some more professional help.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other kinds of things that you'd recommend for employers or for educators that they can do, more on a
Yeah.
macro level?
Yeah. Well, yes, definitely hire me to come in because
All right, absolutely. And we're going to put the information about
the
that in the
Thrive
show notes.
methodology will replace all the current suicide prevention trainings out there, because we are focused on living a life you love. But no, there's two things I'd like people to be aware of. One is, and these are actually on my website. These are free. They should still be on allthatweare.com as far
Yep.
as I know. But it will go into the three factors that put someone at the greatest risk. But I think it's also important to be aware of the three factors that reduce the risk of crisis. And when we're aware of those three factors and we're actually practicing them every day, it not only helps reduce the risk of crisis, but it does help us to achieve success and fulfillment. So those three factors, and they're pretty self-explanatory, but it is meaning, connection, and contribution. So if you are a teacher, for example, or even if you are, let's just say that really the school system is no different than any other business out there. You've got leaders and you've got people that are following directions. Finding ways in your daily activity to experience any type of not any type, meaningful connection is ideal, right? Bringing people together to work together. It allows them the opportunity to contribute to one another, which oftentimes then will bring meaning to what they're doing or to another person's life, right? So you want to have those three factors on a regular basis. The next thing that you'll see on the website in the same video is what I call the SIT method. This is a simple 3-step method to crisis intervention, because even when we're doing everything right, we are eating clean, we are paying attention to what we're watching and reading, we meditate, we do all that stuff, crisis can still happen. If not within myself, it might be someone in my space or even a stranger, at the grocery store. So if we understand the SIT method, we can intervene. And Marcia, I don't know if you know this, but I officially created the SIT method after being in Colombia at the wellness event that we were at
Really?
together. Yeah, because I
Wow.
don't know if you're aware. It's something that I've practiced. I just had never put it into a 3-step method, but it was because of an experience that happened in Colombia that I realized this pattern that I follow. And so our first official night there, it was actually about 2:00 in the morning that I received a text message from someone, and she said, "Are you awake? I could really use a hug." And I immediately saw it and said, "Where are you?" And I went to her room, and I think if anyone else had gone to her, they would have immediately called for emergency services, right? Being in
Wow.
Colombia, I don't know what that would look like. So this is one of the things I really, really want to impress upon people. Someone going through a crisis doesn't always need to have 911 or 988 or a professional therapist. Okay? We have the ability to create stability, each and every one of us, when we are aware and we are just being intentional in the way we're communicating. Okay? So using the following 3 steps, you can support someone and be that stability. So the first step, S, slow down and create the stability. So what I did with her, she opened the door and collapsed into my arm. Okay. I held her there. She had asked for a hug, so I knew physical touch was important. I held her. We moved over to the bed. I sat with her and continued to hold her. I never said a word, right? Other than I've got you. I've got you. Like I said that. And then what I was thinking and what I felt my body radiating out to her was, feel my love. And that was it. And I just continued to hold her and kept thinking it over and over and over again until she started speaking and she started talking about what was going on. Okay, so this is now step 2, intentional communication. This is different from active listening, because active listening is where we're like parroting back what a person's saying. Okay, intentional communication is where we're going to listen, we're going to engage, we're also going to pay attention to what they're feeling, what are we feeling, all of that. And then what we're going to do, instead of parroting back, is you can say, am I hearing you correctly? Is this what you're saying? But one way to help create that connection that's so important is to say, I went through this experience. Is that similar to what you're experiencing or what you're talking about? Or maybe you don't want to share something personal about yourself, but you can say, I saw this TV show or this news story about this happening. Is that similar? Because what you're doing in that moment is you're helping them to know they're not alone, that you are listening, that you are trying to connect with something personal, right? Even if it's not your own story, it's still the fact that you're trying. And then even if let's say they say yes, you're like, okay, score, we got a yes. But let's say they say no. You didn't do anything wrong by sharing a story that they don't connect with. You're learning, right? Because they just gave you information like, nope, that's not it. That's not what okay, so let's continue. And you just do this back and forth and letting them talk and you talk and you're sharing emotion, and allow space to flow, just like this conversation, right? Allow it to go in different directions. Never once focus on fixing the problem, but just allowing people to move through it, because ideally they're going to be the hero of their own story. Okay? You're simply there holding their hand, loving them without fear. And you're loving them without fear because you now have these tools and this awareness to be able to support them and to create that stability. Allow room for laughter in that moment, right? I remember with her, we were talking and she's sharing these different stories, and then I shared something and I was like, oh, good Lord, right? And it was really embarrassing. And we both started laughing, What you also want to do during intentional communication, and it ties into our final step, which is T, stands for transition to next steps, is you start talking about who else are we going to bring into this circle. We never want to be the only person, quote unquote, responsible for this person. Okay. So especially if it feels like a dire situation. And in her case, like I said, had it been anyone else, I am pretty sure they would have called for emergency help. So what you want to do is start talking about, well, who else can we bring in? Well, we're in Colombia, right? And it's day 1. Right. So it's like, who do we know? Luckily, I knew people there. And so I said, hey, what if I were to bring in so-and-so and so-and-so, right? And she's, oh, okay. And I could feel her energy, and I could see, I could test the water and see where we're at. And then the final piece of transitioning next steps, so you've talked about who else you're going to bring into it. Then you're going to say, okay, what are we going to do next? So for us, I got to her room at 2 a.m. It's now 5 a.m. Most of that time has been just me holding her, sharing different stories, some laughter, some tears, a whole mix of things. I can feel her energy. She's calm. Okay. So I say to her, it's 5 a.m. We're supposed to be like at breakfast in a few hours. What do you think about maybe getting some sleep? And she's like, yeah, sleep would be good. I go, okay. Would you like for me to stay in here and sleep with you? Or do you think you'd like to have some alone time? And she's like, no, I think I want some alone time. And I said, okay, perfect. Right. And I felt safe, even though when I first got there, She was actively telling me that she was suicidal. 3 hours later, I felt safe to leave her room. Okay. That is it. Okay. You want to slow down and create stability. You want to have intentional communication, and then you want to transition to next steps. And they don't have to be anything grand, anything huge. It can quite literally be, hey, let's touch base in about 15 minutes, or let's touch base in a couple of hours, you know? And sometimes when we're dealing with someone that we're navigating a situation that is a situational crisis, meaning that it really was just in the moment. I mean, most of the
Mhm.
time, let's admit there's some childhood trauma there that's been
Right.
activated. That's why it feels so big, you know? And if you feel comfortable going there, great. If you don't, just be genuine, be authentic, be intentional. Um, and I think when you have that, what I love about the sit method is each step can be practiced every single day without simulating a crisis. So when you ask, like, how can teachers do this? How can bosses? How can corporations? Practice bringing in the three factors that reduce the risk of crisis: meaning, connection, contribution. Find ways to practice the sit method. Slow down and create stability. Okay. Maybe it's just a heated conversation in a boardroom, right? But slow down and create stability. Have intentional communication. Transition to next steps. Do those things on a regular basis. Who knows? The world could change.
The world would change. And Jenny, this has been such an impactful conversation, not just for people who are dealing with suicide. It could be a friend who has, suffered with a miscarriage, so many other things, because as you said earlier, there's so many things that people are grieving. They're grieving the loss of a marriage, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a business, the loss of a dream, the loss of hope. Right. And the tools that you've given us, which are on your website, and we'll have links to it in the show notes, are incredibly helpful. They're tangible, they're accessible. I've spent a lot of time looking at the site. It's a ridiculous resource. But if people want to bring you in, either to consult with you on a more long-term basis or to have you come in and give presentations, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And who
So,
do you serve mainly?
yeah. So I'm actually in my own time of transition. So
Hmm.
I'll give you all the information to share in the show notes of both websites, because I currently have two websites, but we're transitioning to jennythrasher.com. So
Hmm.
if you're interested in connecting with me, I do offer coaching, so one-to-one coaching. I also offer corporate or organizational consulting, going in and doing workshops and training individuals on the different things that I teach, and then speaking engagements. And so yes, all of that is on the website, and you can access it there. And it's a work in progress, but the foundation
A
of Jenny.
masterpiece and a work in
I know,
process
I
at the
know.
same
I'm very
time.
I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by some really truly incredible and gifted human beings that are helping me to get this work out there. So we will soon be launching Thrive, which is about a 90-minute course that is a 6-part program that, like I said, it's going to revolutionize the way we approach suicide prevention. And we're going to really focus on that. How do we live the life we love?
And there is no greater mission that I can think of, because it literally is saving lives. If people remember one thing from today, just one, what is it you want them to remember?
Love yourself. Love yourself. That is the key to wellness.
Excellent. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for being here. And for all of you who listened, I know you found this helpful. There is something for everybody in this episode. Please like, share, subscribe, share with as many people as you have, and save it, because one day, it may not be now, but one day someone is going to come to you, and you may not remember everything you've heard now, but you've got the language, you've got the tools, and you could save a life. And it could be your child's life, your spouse, your friend. So please, uh, listen to this more than once, save it, and please use the fantastic resources that Jenny has on her site, and we'll have all of those links in the show notes for you. So thanks again, Jenny. This, I do think so far, this is, I think, episode 26 to 27, probably the most important one I've done so far, and maybe the most important one I do in the future, because this topic affects everybody, if not now, later, unfortunately. And I look for the day where there's nothing to talk about on this, because we've all got the language, we've got the
Mhm.
tools, and people are living the life that they love, and loving themselves while they're doing it. So thanks again, Jenny.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Stay tuned for the next episode. If you like what you heard, subscribe and share it with others.